Welcome everybody to the council meeting of September 15th, 2020. This is the special meeting, a study session. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Chow?
Councilmember Chow doesn't have the link. She just came in. Hold on. Can someone send her the link? Can someone in the control room send her the link?
Right now.
Okay. All right.
Councilmember Sinks?
Here.
Councilmember Willie?
Here.
Vice Mayor Paul?
Good evening, I'm here.
Mayor Sharp?
Here. Okay. Councilmember Chow is also here. She's just taking a minute to get her computer connected. We have an item in the study session. It's a study session on proposed revisions to the permitting guidelines for small cell facilities within the public right-of-way. So we can start with the staff report.
Very good. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm Chad Mosley, city engineer. Do you see my screen, the presentation?
We
Yes.
do.
Very good. Tonight, I intend to show you proposed modifications to the city's small cell permitting guidelines that are intended to address comments received from you at the May 5th small cell study session. The modified guidelines also incorporate input from wireless providers and are consistent with the Ninth Court decision that was released August 12th, 2020. And here are small cells are wireless antenna characterized by their smaller size, lower power output, and reduced coverage area relative to a standard macro cell tower. Tonight's discussion is focused on small cell facilities located on city-owned streetlight poles and not macro cell towers. It should be noted that under state law, telephone companies, including wireless providers, may utilize public right-of-way in order to provide utility services. State and federal law and regulations, including the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 and provisions of the California Government Code and Public Utilities Code, govern how local jurisdictions may regulate wireless facilities, including small cellular facilities installed in the public right-of-way. Local governments have the authority to regulate small cellular facility placements and their aesthetic impacts. They also have authority to manage the right-of-way to ensure public safety and to coordinate uses. To reduce the aesthetic impacts of small cell facilities, a local government can set design standards, such as requiring screening of facilities and having equipment coloring match the pole. The authority is balanced against state and federal laws and regulations that limit the scope of local government action regarding wireless facilities and small cells in particular. A September 26, 2018 Federal Communications Commission order placed even stricter limits on local regulation. These limits are designed to facilitate rapid deployment of small cellular facilities and prevent constraints on carriers' abilities to provide a full range of wireless services. Key limits on local regulation stipulate that regulation of wireless facilities must not be based on health concerns, which means that local governments may not set standards for wireless facilities based on concerns over radio frequency emissions beyond requiring that those facilities' emissions meet the FCC's established emission limits. This includes concerns about the health effects of these emissions. As a result, the city may not deny a permit application for a small cellular facility based on concerns over perceived health effects of the facility. Additionally, regulation must not have the effect of prohibiting wireless service. Federal law also requires that local government regulation of wireless service not prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. This means that a jurisdiction cannot deny a service provider's wireless facility application based on the basis that the jurisdiction finds the provider's existing coverage or range of services adequate. Local governments also may not enact a blanket prohibition on installation of small cell facilities in a particular area of the city or in specific neighborhoods. However, a jurisdiction could have grounds to deny a specific placement of a small cellular facility if there is a reasonable alternative location available. Also, short shot clocks for review of small cell facility applications. Local governments are required to act on applications for new wireless facilities within a reasonable period of time. The FCC's September 2018 order set new time limits or shot clocks defining review periods for small cell facility applications. Under this order, a jurisdiction has 60 days to review an application for a placement of a small cell facility on a pre-existing structure and 90 days for review of an application for attachment of small cell facility to a new or replacement structure. As an update, on the August 12, 2029 Circuit Court of Appeals upheld many aspects of the FCC September 2018 order, including the shot clock application review periods and limits on fees charged to carriers. However, the Ninth Circuit vacated the 2018 order's requirement that all aesthetic regulations small cells be objective because the FCC failed to provide a reasoned explanation for that requirement. It should be noted that the proposed modifications made to the guidelines being presented today still comply with the FCC shot clock, but the time period is being fully utilized to shepherd these applications from initial submittal to permit issuance. The City Council has conducted prior study sessions on the city's regulation of small cells on May 16, 2017, July 16, 2019, and May 5, 2020. At the May 5th, 2020 study session, Council recommended that staff analyze the city's existing small cellular permitting guidelines to look for opportunities to enhance the city's aesthetic standards and clarify the permitting process. The resulting modified guidelines being presented tonight take additional steps towards minimizing aesthetic concerns. They further develop the city's reasonable aesthetic standards and provide non-discriminatory processes to manage the build-out of wireless telecommunication networks throughout the city. Modifications to the guidelines in response to council requests include establishing preferred siting categories, setting height limitations. These guidelines set a minimum height of 26 feet and a maximum height of 41 feet for non-residential zones and 36 feet for residential zones. Council requested that we clarify the need for encroachment permits to modify existing small cell facilities. The modifications include an increase to the notification radius for nearby property owners from 300 feet to 500 feet. They also lengthened the notification response period for residents from 14 days to 21 days. And they memorialize a 500-foot minimum spacing requirement between small cell facilities from the same carrier. The modified guidelines also provide further clarity to many of the city processes. One of the biggest changes to the city's guidelines was the inclusion of the site preferences procedures. Here, existing streetlights within the city were broken down into 3 categories from preferred locations to least preferred locations. Category 1, preferred locations, establishes that streetlights in non-residential areas are preferred sites within Cupertino. Category 2, less preferred locations, covers all areas within residential zoning districts. In Category 3, least preferred locations includes those locations in residential districts that are within 20 feet of occupied structures, 100 feet from school structures, 100 feet from public playgrounds, and 15 feet from public intersections. The Category 2 locations are further broken down in order of preference based on the street type on which a small cell facility is being proposed, with arterials being more preferred, followed by major collectors, minor collectors, neighborhood connectors, and finally residential streets as the least preferred Category 2 locations. Permit applicants who propose new facilities in Category 2 or Category 3 locations should show that there are either no other locations within a 500-foot radius that are more preferred, or must provide documentation that shows all other locations within a 500-foot radius are not feasible to meet the carrier's needs. These siting guidelines will work towards reducing visual and aesthetic impacts to the public and to residential neighborhoods, while also providing a clear process for establishing more preferred sites for these facilities. It should be noted that these preferred siting guidelines do not establish moratoria in any regions of the city, but work to set up a process in which to work towards more preferred locations whenever possible. The City of Los Altos established strict location requirements for the placement of wireless facilities in residential districts and within 500 feet of schools, with very limited exceptions that were challenging for carriers to meet. Both Verizon Wireless and AT&T had submitted applications for small cells in restricted areas where they stated their wireless service was inadequate. These applications were denied by the city, and both companies filed lawsuits against the city in January of 2020. Those lawsuits asserted that the city's strict location requirements amounted to an improper blanket ban on small cells in 85% of the city, 2, that the city's denial of the applications was not based on substantial evidence, and 3, that the denial was based on radio frequency concerns or concerns over small cell health effects in violation of federal law. That litigation is ongoing. In the past, there have been concerns that the city's public notification process did not cover enough area and that time to respond was too short. The list provided here compares Cupertino's requirements with those of other nearby cities. As can be seen, the requirements are fairly consistent across the various cities, with the notification area ranging from 250-foot radius up to 600-foot radius from a proposed facility. Cupertino has increased its notification radius from 300 to 500 feet with these modified guidelines. 500 is fairly consistent with the signal propagation area of a typical 5G small cell facility. The notification period is also relatively consistent among the cities in the region, ranging from 7 days on the low end up to 21 days on the upper end. Cupertino has increased its notification period from 14 days to 21 days. We are now at the upper end. Though in practice, we do review all correspondence from residents regarding small cell facilities, even after the notification period has ended. The city's 5 basic stages for permitting small cell applications remains very much the same as the previous guidelines and consists of 5 basic stages. While the updated guidelines do not drastically alter these steps, they do revise and clarify some of the processes within each stage. The first stage, which is not a required stage for the permitting process, involves a pole availability request to ensure the pole is available and is the most preferred pole location in the general area. While this is a voluntary step, it does help to reduce unnecessary effort on the applicant's behalf and helps to streamline the rest of the encroachment permit process. The second stage, the initial encroachment permit submittal, involves the applicant submitting to the city conceptual drawings, including a vicinity map, a photo of the pole, and photo simulations of the proposed equipment. The city reviews this information for compliance with the city's guidelines, for location concerns, and for aesthetic qualities and features of the equipment. Once the submittal is accepted, the city then directs the applicant to begin the notification process. Notification involves the applicant mailing letters to all property owners within a 500-foot radius of the proposed facility location. Property owners are provided 21 days to review and respond to the notification. A representative from the applicant's team is available to receive and answer any questions from interested parties. Once the notification period is ended, the applicant forwards to the city a list of all inquiries received, including the topic of interest and the individual's name and contact information if provided. The city reviews all inquiries and concerns and works to address any issues it can. Again, it should be noted that the city cannot deny a wireless project due to concerns over radio frequency emissions from a facility as long as those emissions are within FCC set limits. After the notification period is ended, and recommended modifications as a result of the notification process are incorporated into the design, the city has the applicant submit construction drawings for permitting. Once the submittal is approved, the city issues permits for construction. The final stage of the process comes when construction is completed. The city requires that the applicant submit as-built drawings of the facility if there were modifications that occurred during construction, and the city requires the applicant to perform post-construction testing. The post-construction testing policy has been established to ensure facilities are compliant with the FCC radio frequency limits. Additionally, we provided an opportunity for nearby residents to request that testing be done within and around their residence if desired. Once the testing has been performed and the results have been verified that the facility is operating within the approved limits, the permit is closed out. For reference, most nearby jurisdictions follow very similar permitting processes. Recently, the city has seen a dramatic increase in the number of applications being submitted for small cell permits. As the number of applications received far exceeds the limited staffing resources available in which to focus on them, the city has requested tolling agreements for a significant number of them in order to provide staff with additional time in which to respond. If tolling agreements cannot be secured, staff will be looking into opportunities to find additional support, including limited-term staffing help and third-party consultants. In an endeavor to provide relevant information to residents and interested parties, both the Public Works Department and IT have worked collaboratively to establish an online resource page for these facilities. By navigating to the webpage listed at the bottom of this image, residents can sign up to be notified by email of all small cell permitting efforts occurring within the city. There is also a link that will take you to a GIS map that shows the location of all proposed, permitted, and active small cell antennae within the city. There is also an FAQ, the city's permitting guidelines, and a depiction of the approved designs for small cell facilities on city-owned streetlight poles. This page currently houses the updated guidelines being presented this evening. And with that, that concludes the presentation, and staff is here to take any questions you may have.
All right, very good. So do we have any questions from other members of the city council before we go to public comments?
I have a question. If we could go back to the map.
One second. This map here?
Yeah. So does that include all small cells on your current outstanding 20 list?
This map may not. This map has not been updated with the latest as of the moment. This is more of just a picture showing that. If you were to go to this link, it would show all the latest information.
Is it dramatically different than this? I mean, if we're talking 1 or 2, but if we're talking 10 or 20 or 50, I mean, how representative is this map?
There's probably maybe an additional 10 in there, more in the notification area, and maybe a couple that have been listed. It's not in the 50 range as of yet.
Okay.
We do have currently 80 applications on file.
How many would you say are on this map? I mean, is this 60 and then you've got another 20 that are...
No, I'm talking 80 above and beyond what you see here.
Ah.
Wait, so you mean right now there are 80 open applications? So would the guidelines that we see today apply to the 80 that's being submitted?
We would work towards applying those to the 80 that have currently been submitted, yes. We'll ask that notification radiuses be increased as well as the notification period, and we'll be following much the same. With respect to the site preferencing list, that's a little more complicated because these are already underway. And to kind of dial back may be a little complicated to do that.
So we should have done this a whole year ago. That's why I have been saying that we are too late, right?
In all honesty,
80 of them, that's a lot because that's expected. Once FCCC relaxed that rule, this is coming. And now we are like catching up.
In all honesty, these were all submitted in the last month in response to these modifications to the guidelines. The modifications, I think, disturbed some of the carriers, and they were trying to get in under the radar.
I'm a little
That's
confused.
why, I mean, other cities adopted urgency ordinance last year as soon as they learn about the FCC change. And that's the kind of thing we should have done, is to really speed this up. Yeah. Okay, but still very, very good work that we are finally getting it done. Thank you. Sorry, John.
No, I was just going to say, I'm a little confused, the 20 versus the 80, and are they different categories? So if the 80 are not necessarily going to be pushed for the 3 categories, are the 20 different than the 80, and the 20 get even less guideline?
I guess I'm not fully understanding the question.
So you said there's 20 now that you're trying to combine, and then you say there's 80 more that are coming. So you're saying, what I think I was hearing is that the 80 are not necessarily going to be pushed for whatever we guidance we give tonight, it's not an agenda item, but whatever guidance that we give tonight is not necessarily going to be pushed on those 80, but then we have the other 20.
So we've got a number that are already going through the permitting process right now. It's somewhere around 10 to 20. And we have another 80 that are already kind of in that permitting process, a little earlier on, that have come in the last month. We're going to try and do what we can to apply these guidelines to all the permits that we have now, but we may not be able to go through and get full documentation on the site preferencing list. With respect to, exact locations, but staff has been generally trying to locate these facilities in the most preferred locations since the beginning. I mean, we have worked closely with the providers to try and steer these to the best possible location in neighborhoods.
Is there a way that you could kind of identify the ones that would be falling in the category 3? I mean, okay, let's not worry about the commercial areas and things like that. And so, well, 10 to 20, but if there's 2 or 3 that are in the category 3, I think it would really be helpful for us to know that, and that we help guide you to spend your time on those sensitive ones as opposed to the other 17.
Yeah, and again, as I've stated, staff has been pushing what we can, these facilities away from those category 3 sites from the beginning. There may be one application out of all the ones we've received that would be potentially in a category 3. But there have been a number of attempts to locate these facilities in areas that would be closer than 20 feet to a residence, and we've been systematically steering providers away from those locations for the last couple of years. There's possibly a location where we may have a facility within 100 feet of a school structure, but those applications are limited to maybe 1 or 2. But like I said, these are kind of formalizing a process that staff has been following for a number of years.
Maybe one more question, and that is, the shot clock kind of identifies the existing poles versus poles that would be new. But the question that I would be prompted to ask is, okay, so there's an existing pole, which obviously would be much less expensive or much cheaper for the provider to say, hey, gee whiz, I want to go ahead and use that pole. But if it pushes it to the category 3, and yet if there was available, maybe it's close to a commercial area, and no problem to go and move it the 100 feet, but it would require a new pole. And while that's going to be covered on his cost, I could just see a reason why he would, possibly try to keep from having to do that extra pole at the detriment or the expense of, the resident. And what kind of feeling do you have there, or what kind of guidance? To what degree?
I can easily explain that.
Okay.
The city is currently all of our streetlight poles are Caltrans 1992 standards. We established our streetlight poles with those 92 standards and have stayed with that standard since then, because it's got an 11-inch bolt circle at the bottom. The updated standards had 12 inches, and we've not revised our pole standards because we would have to go out and get brand new and basically have 2 types of materials at the city. So we've stuck with the 92 standards for a while now. And that standard, I have yet to see any small cell facility that can be structurally secured with that existing pole. So to date, all applications require new poles.
And is it the same price if there's an existing pole with concrete there versus a different location, which there may be sidewalk, but the sidewalk is obviously not intended to take the load of a light pole, so they'd need to, kind of put a post in the ground with concrete. So again, I'm still kind of wrestling with that concept of they're trying, they conceivably would try and do it the cheapest, easiest way they could. And I think we're gonna, be saying in sensitive areas, there's more here than just how cheap can it be done. So
Yeah, understood. And typically when it comes to, replacing a pole, the foundation has historically needed to be replaced as well.
okay, that's good to know.
If in your hypothetical situation that somebody wants to, place one in a category 3 location as opposed to placing a new pole in a preferred site, it would actually be cheaper for them to place a new pole than it would be to demo the existing pole and the existing foundation and reconstruct it.
Great.
So, we're getting into, hypotheticals and kind of nuanced situations, and, each situation has to kind of be evaluated separately. Staff has done what we can to ensure, an orderly build out and one that makes sense. We do have our citizens' concerns at heart, and at the same time, we're trying to follow the guidelines that have been, handed down to us from on high.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any comments before we move to public comment?
So can you clarify, you are saying that the current poles are not strong enough for small cell equipment, so for any of the application, they will need to install new poles?
I have
confused.
yet to find.
I hear it wrong.
No, I have yet to find an existing pole that has been shown to be structurally adequate to basically support this new equipment.
Wait, I thought the whole purpose of the federal regulation is to permit them to put it on our street poles. But if they have to install a whole new pole, how it does, and that means they don't need to
They're
be
replacing.
limited to the current location of the street poles at
Yeah,
all,
so
right?
they're removing existing streetlight pole infrastructure and replacing that with a new streetlight pole that is structurally adequate.
Okay, but
In
I
the
think
same
a lot of times for aesthetic purposes, if you had a street light right in front of someone's window, for both potential radiation and aesthetic purposes, that's less desirable versus maybe moving it just a few feet so that it's facing like the side of like in between houses, right? That's a more desirable location. So if they are going to install a new pole anyway, can we then ask them that let's take out the old pole, move it a few feet so that the new pole is between houses, so that it's like at least this many feet away from a window?
Yeah, and so
Is that possible? That this, you can argue that for aesthetic purposes too, that I don't want to look out the window and see some equipment.
yeah, and we don't have a lot of streetlight poles that are directly in front of people's windows, but in that case, if this was the only pole, we would request that they relocate, or should I say, put a new pole at a property corner that makes more sense. Aesthetically, we're trying to enhance these facilities, and we would work with them on removal of the existing pole. At worst, city staff would remove that pole if we couldn't get them to do it. But you're kind of talking again about a hypothetical situation that's very detailed. Each is reviewed by 2 separate engineers to ensure that we are locating these in the best location. We are actively trying to facilitate. We're not trying to create non-aesthetic issues here. We're trying to pick the best location. If they weren't willing to relocate that pole, we'd work to have them put it on a completely different pole.
But this also means that they don't have to be limited by the existing poles. Maybe there are good locations right now in the city because the poles, street poles were there for a purpose to light up the street. Likely it will be close to where people live. Likely there might be other public right of ways that's further away from people's activities, but lights were not necessary at that time. And now that would be an ideal location for small cells.
Correct.
So can we
We do allow
proactively consider these locations that's in public right of way that's more ideal for small cells, but maybe less ideal for light poles?
We do allow new light pole infrastructure to infill current gaps that the city may have in its street lighting alignment. Our standard policy is typically having streetlights located 150 feet apart on opposite sides of the street. But there are areas within the street where there are gaps in our streetlight layouts. And where there may be a gap where a new streetlight would be poignant and it would facilitate a more preferred location, we would work with a provider to allow a new installation.
But then you are relying on them to approach us first, right?
Again, we work with the provider on every location, and if we find that there is a better location, we recommend that they look at that. I mean, we are looking at every location. This isn't a rubber stamp approval. Every location is analyzed, reviewed to ensure that we're trying to locate this in the best spot.
So right now, your shot clock is 60 days?
Typically 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
Typically 90 days.
90 days, okay, 90 days. And now you have 80 applications to process within that 90 days?
That is correct. We are currently requesting some tolling agreements to help give us some additional time to be able to respond to those in a timely manner. The applicants have been willing or are considering providing that to us. Barring that, we'll be requesting deposits to cover potentially some third-party review of these permits so that we can provide a timely response.
So how many of them are from the same providers?
So one provider has submitted close to 80 and another provider has submitted potentially another 10 to 12, something
So
like
it's all from one providers. And who is it?
It's Verizon.
Okay, so if they submitted all at the same time, that's increasing our staff load. And then, so are we allowed to charge them an extra fee because they didn't space it out? Because we have to incur extra costs because they didn't.
Please let him respond.
Yeah, we're not allowed to charge an extra fee. We can only charge cost recovery fees. So if we go with a third-party consultants, we would basically charge Verizon the cost of the third-party consultant to review those plan fees. If we're doing it internally, we do have permit fees that have been established that kind of set an average staff cost per permit.
That's what I mean by, I meant cost recovery, because if they had paced the 80 application into multiple months, we wouldn't need a third-party consultant, right?
That's correct, and they are responsible.
So we should be able to get cost recovery that's in addition to what we had expected.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good to know. And can we post all the 80 locations? When are we going to see it on the website? I think you have 5 stages, right?
Yeah.
The first one is assessment that they will done themselves. And then initial submittal is the second one. That's when the city will know about it.
That's correct. So they've submitted kind of the pole availability requests. That's where they're at now. We've gone through the 70, tried to locate poles that were in better locations. We're getting back to them on those, and we're beginning to see initial encroachment permit application submittals, and we're in the process of reviewing these. After we've reviewed the initial encroachment permit to state that, yeah, this is going to work, they'll go into the notification process. Once it goes to the notification process, you will see items being populated on the map. I'm expecting that you'll probably see a drastic increase in the population of this map sometime within the next couple of weeks. And in fact, I think as of today or yesterday, we added maybe 10 to a dozen on the map, just because things are beginning to progress.
Oh, wait, so we will see it in the map after the public notification or before?
Basically, when we allow the applicant to notice, we alert IT and IT populates the map. So it's basically, they coincide, they're parallel.
So the third step, so by third step, the public will see that in the map.
Correct.
But that's usually when the site is more or less already decided.
That's when we've verified that that the site, should work. It's a decent location, and that the engineered plans are consistent with being able to actually build that site. We don't necessarily want to notify prior to understanding that site's actually buildable.
Okay, so the 90-day shot clock starts from the initial submission, and then by the time the public gets notified, how many days would have usually typically elapsed from within that 90-day window?
We try to respond within 10 days, whether the initial encroachment permit application is complete and adequate. Part of the problem right now is we are bogged down. So, it's going to be longer than that. At a minimum, we want to make sure we're responding within 30 days.
So typically it will be 10 days, but it could be 30 days. But right now it's more than 30 days because they all came in together.
It could be more than 30 days. We're working diligently to go through these applications to get them done as fast as we can.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Rod, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. Just to get some basic facts on the table, how many light poles do we have total in the city of Cupertino?
About 4,000.
About 4. Okay. How many of those are in residential areas?
I couldn't tell you the number exactly within residential areas. I apologize.
Okay. In a residential area, what is the typical light pole spacing?
About 150 feet between light pole fixtures.
About 150 feet between light poles. So while you might modulate the spacing a little bit, in general, you're trying to get some lighting across the residential area of the city at about that grid, right?
That's correct.
So okay, that helps. And what you've also said is that the range of these small cells is around 500 feet.
For 5G, correct. They're about 500 feet.
So I guess what that would basically allow is decent coverage for about 4 carriers if we end up, I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years with basically, a whole set of poles representing good diversity. I mean, ideally, we'd like some competition between the carriers, right?
That is correct. And as you'll notice from the guidelines, we do establish a 500-foot spacing guideline between facilities of the same carrier. That way we can facilitate a potential of up to 4 carriers.
It kind of seems smart to me because honestly, you wouldn't want one carrier to come in first and say, I want all the poles in one neighborhood and then sort of play games and trade or whatever, right? We'd like to be in control of this. So I think that makes good sense. If we got uncooperative and said, we don't want to do any of this, and aside from the contractual obligations we've already incurred, does federal preemption basically allow carriers now to put up cells on any old pole, on a power pole, without any real consultation with us?
So with respect to placing facilities on power poles, wireless providers do have that right. The FCC and the California Utilities Commission have allowed that. They would need to get an encroachment permit from us, but our ability to regulate poles on joint poles or I should say regulate facilities on joint poles is much reduced. To date, we have a settlement agreement with both Verizon and AT&T that indicates that they will steer towards utilizing city poles wherever feasible and practical.
Yeah, I mean, I know in some other cities, they haven't worked it out and it's been much more contentious, right? So I'm generally happy with the regime as we have it. And I think you've done a reasonable job here. I just want to talk a little bit about where we are at on this deposit. So do we have a deposit requirement now? We're proposing 5,000 a pole, right?
Correct. We have not up to date because, for the most part, we've been handling it in-house. Honestly, with the proposed modifications to these guidelines, a number of carriers tried to get in, under the radar with that. And so with the proposed guidelines, we actually established a deposit criteria at that point in time because we could see that we could get overloaded fairly quickly.
So the real issue is, I think you explained this to me earlier, you have one half staff on doing this work, and with the shot clock as it is, overall 90 days, you can't, with current staffing, the shot clock on some of these things is bound to expire unless we can ramp up and handle the peak. And maybe this is extraordinary, or maybe this is long-lived. Do you have any insight into that? I mean, basically the story you're telling is as a result of the council saying it wants to screw this down a bit. We're seeing a whole flood of applications. But I mean, if we have, what did you say, 4,000 poles up for grabs, do you think, and 5G pressing, do you think we're going to continue to see this kind of volume and so have to think about more, I'm not saying it has to be in-house, but additional bandwidth on a permanent basis, or is this just a temporary thing?
I think to a certain extent, having additional bandwidth on let's say a longer term basis, over the next 5 to 6 years, as these build outs become more prevalent and important to the wireless providers. After that time, I think that to a certain extent, it may, level off a little bit or drop down because eventually, we'll have potentially an antenna on every pole in the city. There's only 4,000 locations to be chosen, and that's going to limit how long this would last. But I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see very concerted pushes from the various providers to have these facilities installed.
They're going to be competitive, right? Because 5G is a thing, and you can't do it with poles 2 miles away. They've got to be in your neighborhood, I guess. So, okay. And so, I mean, I guess what you're also saying is if there aren't light poles where carriers want them, carriers could either request that we put a light pole in, or they could just put a pole in, right? They have preemption to allow them to do that.
I might let the attorneys answer this one, but we have steered clear of new poles, except where a new streetlight pole would facilitate an infill where we currently don't have a streetlight and would desire one based on our spacing guidelines.
Okay. Attorney, you have anything to say?
This is Marlene Dalinger with the City Attorney's Office. As Chad explained, carriers do have the right to install their facilities in the right of way. And it seems likely that a carrier would look to, if there were no remaining light poles, that it may look to a utility pole first. But there may be the potential of a new pole if there isn't an existing pole that would meet the carrier service needs.
Right. So, I mean, the unfortunate thing about just any old pole is the equipment, right? The bill that was going through the California legislature and passed before Governor Brown vetoed it would have allowed, I think, 35 cubic feet of stuff, equipment just hanging on a pole. So system we've come up with, I think is pretty good. It seems like we're able to, carriers are willing to work with us right now, which is good. And I think we ought to do what we can to keep this. We did get a letter from Verizon complaining about 5,000. And I'm just wondering if, Chad, I mean, how conservative is that? Is that a sustained amount if we keep this up, or is this like just to handle the peak right now? I mean, I'm sensitive to the idea that, we ought to administrate these things fairly and not so burden this that somehow, right, the balance here gets to a point where we have a more adversarial relationship.
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to the $5,000. I mean, the city's current encroachment permit fee is about $2,000. I find kind of based on past history that consultants end up costing the city or, charging about twice as much as city staff to get things done. So that would have taken it to a $4,000 deposit. My request for $5,000 was basically so that I don't have to go back and ask for money again. I don't like asking for money and then asking for more money. I prefer to ask for money once and then give the rest of the money back that's not used. It's just more of a practicality as opposed to.
I see. So when you say deposit, the intention then is to figure out what our actual costs are and to rebate that part of it once the total bill is in.
That's
Is that
correct. Right? We would charge time and materials for our consultant. I think our fee schedule allows for a 15% administrative fee for the city to cover our costs for monitoring this. But yeah, it would be a time and materials deposit, and whatever's not used would go back to the carrier. Vice versa. If for some reason one review costs $10,000, we would request that they do pay additional money. But I don't want to do that on a regular basis. I'd like to ask once and then give the rest back.
No, I get it. It gets harder to go back to the well twice. Well, thank you. That answers my questions for now. Appreciate all your hard work on this.
Great. Okay. The only question I had, and Councilmember Chow brought this up, are most of our poles placed between houses? I know when I look at my house, the pole is not in front of my house. It's between my house and the next house over. But is that just a coincidence, or do we make an effort to do it that way?
The vast majority of streetlight poles are located between property lines, or I should say, at the property corners. Not all of them, and especially not in commercial areas where you've got properties that span.
That are long, right?
But with respect to residential, they're typically located at property corners. You may be able to go out and locate a handful here and there that aren't, but they typically are.
Right. Yeah, I think it was a good suggestion that if there happens to be one directly in front of a house, we look at relocating that before we put the 5G in. I don't know how hard that is in terms of running power to it. Probably not terribly hard. Okay. Darcy, did you have anything before we go to public comment? Darcy's not here.
Same
Yeah,
here.
no, I don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, great. Then we'll go to public comment. I see 2 hands raised. First is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer. I don't have any way to allow to talk. I'm not sure what's going on here. I may not be a host anymore because Zoom crashed and I had to come back. Oh, there we go.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I had sent an email to Kristen just in case this fire blew up again. Anyway, you guys kind of talked about what one of my questions is. I just found that unusual that there had been 80 applications this month. And I was wondering if that was distributed among the main telecommunication vendors or if it was just one. It sounds like it was Verizon mainly. And that's kind of scary. Why did Verizon do that? Actually, we have Verizon. Why did they find that necessary to do that? And why did AT&T not do that? Why did Sprint? The other question is, are these what are the main players in telecommunication vendors? Is it AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, some of the other ones we've heard of? Are there 4 or 5 main participants in telecommunication vendors, or are there some new groups we've never heard of? If you guys could discuss that, I'd appreciate it. But I find that the fact that we have 4,000 poles in the city, and we could potentially have tremendous amounts of stuff on them, and maybe we'd be putting in new poles in places in the neighborhoods. Believe me, with the Scott Wiener bills, we have enough issues with fourplexes going in neighborhoods. We don't need extra poles going in the middle of properties. If you guys could address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So Chad, I think, we've got basically T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. Since Sprint is now owned by T-Mobile, I do believe the Dish Network, who bought part of the Sprint business, is thinking of doing 5G as well. Is that true?
I'm not sure of Dish Network. Basically, the three main players I'm aware of are Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Verizon and AT&T actually have master license agreements with the city for installation of small cells. And we've got a number of other players, including Mobility, Exonet, and Crown Castle, who have master license agreements. I know in the past, T-Mobile has worked with, I want to say it was Crown Castle. And I think Sprint at one point in time was working with Mobility. But my understanding is at this point in time, it's really just 3 main players.
All right, thank you. Next is Kitty Moore. Welcome, Kitty.
Good evening, Mayor. So just as a reminder, we're working on dark skies ordinance. So I'm kind of concerned that there might be some sort of a contradiction, or that we might need to incorporate the possibility that there will be more lights added, and how is that going to be incorporated into dark skies. And I was hoping that we could be given, 3 to 5 positive reasons why we want to have these small cell towers. And I'm concerned about we have power poles in the backyards in my neighborhood, and I'm sure other neighborhoods as well. And it sounded as though that these could be allowed on power poles in our backyards. And my concern there is, what is the rear yard setback if you're going to add an ADU? And how close could an ADU end up being next to one of these poles? And I'm also concerned about if there was something mentioned about having a situation where a provider could be scooping up the poles. And, my concern, elaborating on that, is whether or not they could then later on auction them off. So I'd like to hear about that. And do we have an FAQ page on this item which shows the map and, easily how to show that map and pull it up? And I was kind of hoping that tonight staff could demonstrate how you pull up the small cell map, and you can see where the existing cells are and the new proposed ones are also. Thank you.
All right, Chad. Yeah, that's a good question I didn't think of. I know in my yard, I've got a power pole right in the yard, and I could put an ADU within 4 feet of the fence, presumably.
Yeah, and I'm sure the attorneys can correct me on this, but my understanding is utility companies have the right to use the public right of way, not necessarily public utility easements. They may be able to correct me on that. At this point in time, I know a lot of providers are not interested are not even interested in placing facilities in backyards. But again, maybe Marlene could clarify whether a public utility easement would be a viable option or not. Do you know, Marlene?
That's not something that I've looked into, but I also haven't seen any mention of carriers taking that approach. Really, the focus has been on installation in the public right of way.
Okay, and Kitty had several other questions, including about the map, if there could be some kind of app on our website to look at these.
And if I could share my screen, I can show you really quickly. This takes you to the homepage for Cupertino. If you go to Our City and Public Works, and go to Permitting, you'll see small cell information down here. If you click on that, there's an FAQ, sample small cell permit, the encroachment requirements that we're talking about today, some design standards. There's also over here an opportunity to sign up to be notified of small cell facilities and modifications there. But this will take you to the map, which shows, and there you go. And you can see on the right, the crosses are macro towers. The light tan are proposed facilities. These are ones where the carrier has been permitted to notify residents. The orange are applications that we are reviewing now and have approved, I should say. These are applications where we have approved installation. And the green ones are where they have actually finalized construction and done post testing for RF exposure to verify that it's within the FCC limits. This does kind of go throughout the entire city. And, if you click on one of these that is already active, you can see there is the activation report here. And this will give you the results from the engineer who did the RF testing, if this pops up. And there it is, slowly but surely. The activation report, which talks about what their findings were.
All right, wonderful. Okay.
And we work to keep that as up to date as possible.
Okay, our next speaker is Mooney. Welcome, Mooney. Oops. Are you there, Mooney? You seem to have disappeared. Mooney, I see you again. Go ahead.
Yep. Could you hear me now?
Yeah, you have 3 minutes. Start.
Okay. Thank you. So good evening, Mayor and Council. So I've not been tracking this topic that closely. So mostly, I'm interested in one clarification for one question. So I know these microcell towers are going on public utility poles and all that. So my question is somewhat related to what Kitty asked earlier, right? So are they allowed to put a microcell tower on the electric poles that are in the backyards between, residents and all that? And if it's a gray area, or, or if they are allowed to, is there a way that, we can do something to prevent it? Like, I can understand, on the main streets and the poles, in front of the homes, or, street lights, going on top of that. But I think, putting these towers in the backyards of people is a little bit, too intrusive. So I'd like to understand, if it's allowed, and if it's allowed, can we do something, to disallow that? Thank you.
Okay. Can the attorney? I think you said you didn't know the answer to that question.
Go ahead. That's not something that we've looked into, but again, the focus of regulations around these installations has been in the public right of way. I haven't seen any proposals for them to be located within a public utility easement on somebody's private property. I haven't.
Yeah, I think we should look into that. I know on my pole in my backyard, I constantly have AT&T and Comcast coming in to do something with their optical fiber. So they are being used by cable broadband providers. I could see that some 5G provider might think they're fair game as well. And it's very different to have a cell in your backyard than the wires in terms of both aesthetics and radiation. So maybe we should be looking into that. All right. Next, well, let's move along. We don't have much time. Alex, welcome, Alex.
Good evening. Can you hear me,
Hi.
Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor and members of the council, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Alex Loip, and I am with Verizon. I have had the pleasure of speaking with some of you outside of these meetings, and look forward to speaking with the remainder of you soon. I do want to, a couple things. First of all, I just want to again reference our letter that our outside counsel did submit. But what I would like to focus on is just sort of the big picture here again. Similar, things that we talked about in the May 5th study session. I've been at home for 6 months working on my computer and working over Zoom and meeting with folks. And my children just last week just started school and they're on Zoom all day. And it's something that I've discovered has changed the way that I work, because all three of us on Zoom, both my kids and myself on Zoom at the same time, stresses the network. And I'm not alone. There are thousands, millions of us here in the Bay Area and thousands in Cupertino that are doing the same thing. They're working at home, they're living at work, whatever you want to call it. And this infrastructure is so essential. And it's not just about wireless service on your phone. Most people are at home and they have Wi-Fi, and that's great. Not everyone does, but most people in Cupertino, I'm sure, do. But what this network is going to facilitate is more than just wireless service. What we are building is a new competitor for home broadband. And so we want to be that home broadband provider along with Comcast and AT&T and whoever else might be serving the community right now. We think we can do it at a much lower price point because we won't need to run wires and fiber to the premises. You can actually get that gigabit speed wireless Wi-Fi in your home just from a 5G small cell nearby. It's really going to change the way that we work at home. It's going to drive prices down. It's competition. And this is something that we're trying to build throughout the Bay Area. We're building it next door in San Jose. I was just talking with Mayor Liccardo the other week, and he was trying to figure out ways to accelerate the build in his city to make this a reality. And so we don't want there to be winners and losers with this technology in the Valley. I grew up in the Valley. My parents still live there. And I think that every community there on the west side, east side should have the same access to this technology. And it's not just about school, it's not just about work, it's about healthcare too. Increasingly, especially now during this COVID crisis, people are afraid to go for routine checkups or to have questions with their doctor.
Okay, finish up.
And that's going to be critical.
Minutes.
I apologize. Thank you very much for the time, and I really look forward to keep working with you and the city on building this network out. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Last, we have Nori. Welcome, Nori. Nori, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I have a couple questions. As Jennifer mentioned that I'm also concerned 70 applications from Verizon and 10 from AT&T. Currently, there are many existing cells are from Verizon. So AT&T might apply a lot more same way as Verizon. And second question is, when carrier switch to 5G, from 4G to 5G, do they apply the permit, or they can switch to 5G whenever they want? And the third question is, that's activation report. There is only one number measuring RF number, emission number on activation report. How do they get the number? Is that the average number or lowest number or highest number? Do they post on activation report? And the last one is, does city double check the measurement, or anybody go with them to take the measurement? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, Chad. So I think the first question may be related to the non-small cell when they take a 4G cell and add 5G to it. Is there any new permit required to do that for the existing large cell?
Yeah, and so based on that type of permit application, that would be a modification to an existing facility. They are required to acquire an encroachment permit, but because now that's an existing facility, it is now in the 60-day shot clock as established by the FCC. Additionally, because it's an existing facility, there's no notification process because we need to figure out how to get this permit finalized within 60 days. We do, however, require that once it's up and activated, that they provide a new activation report for that facility so that we can then document it and provide it on the web page.
Okay, and the other question she had?
And the other question was regarding...
Oh, does the city go out and do its own testing?
We do not. Each of the activation reports is signed and stamped by a registered California engineer. These guys have their licenses on the line to ensure that they're meeting the requirements.
Okay. Yeah, is Nori still here? I forgot what her other question was. I don't see her here anymore. It was, Nori, what you had a question about the number of applications by Verizon. Are you still there?
I think her last question was having to do with if the RF number that's on the activation report is an average, low, or high.
Right. Is that Chad, is that a peak, or did they do multiple readings and give the average, or how did they do that?
So my understanding is they're typically doing a measurement, basically at the antenna. And typically once you're 1 foot away from the antenna, you're below the FCC limits. But they're also additionally doing measurements at ground level for pedestrians. And they take measurements if there's like a second story building nearby, they'll take a measurement potentially at the property line at that elevation to see what the readings are. It may not be that for every case, but typically they're doing 2 to 3 readings, and they're measuring it at the level at which the antenna is to be operating. So this antenna is operating, and then they measure it. It's not like they're checking maximum power or minimum power. It's just that is the operating frequency or the operating power.
All right, very good. I see one more hand, and after this we'll finish. Elango Ganga, welcome.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Elango Ganga. I'm speaking for myself. I've also been a technology commission member in the last year. So I have some background on the discussions that's going on and the guideline that's being put forward. First thing is I would like to commend the city council and the staff members for coming up with proactively coming up with the guidelines, so that any of these service providers who come up for putting out their antennas on the utility poles, and I think there's a clear guidelines that they have to follow. So one thing, I have a few questions related to that. Number one is like you have an attachment C, you have categorized the sites as category 1, 2, and 3, like preferred sites, less preferred sites, and so on, right? The least preferred sites. So the question is, how do we ensure that when an application comes forward, they are asking for a facility that's in category 3, that's the least preferred sites, versus how do we make sure that there are other options available in the category 1 or 2 that would be beneficial. And remember the other commenters had questions about the backyards and the facilities in the backyard. Does that, maybe we should clearly point out that whether it falls under the category 3, if at all it falls under, the public, the private property. If it is in the private property, is that covered under the public right of way or not, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is the macro cells. So if at all there is already a macro cell in that residential area, and for example, there is one on the Cupertino city center, and then that covers 2 of the service providers, Verizon as well as AT&T. So if there is already a macro cell, is there, the facilities around it, the public utility, public lanes around it, is that coming under category 1, 2, or 3? So maybe that's something needs to be clarified, because if you already have a macro cell and that sufficiently addresses the needs, do you still need to allow how much a zone around that macro cell? Do we need to still allow a micro cell in that area or not?
Okay, Chad.
And with respect to the last question, with respect to whether a small cell in a certain area is still needed if there's a macro cell, I'm not the network engineer. We've got Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. We've got network engineers. They're typically not trying to put up small cells for willy-nilly reasons. They're typically putting these up because they feel that there is a need, whether it's a capacity issue, a coverage issue, or some other issue. I mean, they're not just doing this to do it. There are needs for their network. So if there's a macro tower nearby and they're putting in a small cell, it's probably for capacity purposes. Macro towers are not necessarily capacity-driven structures. It's a huge tower that spans a large range, but in certain areas where you've got high traffic, a small cell may be appropriate because you need to serve more people. With respect to the cities trying to locate these facilities in better locations, we do have GIS, a lot of GIS information. I'm sharing my screen again. Here's one where you can see these yellow are all the various streetlights. And so if somebody were to come in and apply for one in a least preferred location, let's say this was a least preferred location, we would look at all the other facilities in a 500-foot area to say, well, why was this chosen? Why not choose this one here because it's further away from a structure? So we look at each of the locations to find out, is this the best spot, or are there better, more preferred locations? We have a lot of tools to kind of help us, and we do that with every site. And then again, Elongo had concerns about potentially small cells on utility poles and backyards. We'll dig into this. We need to understand that a little bit better. To date, I've talked with various providers. They have no desire to go into that. Doesn't mean they may not have a desire at some point in the future, but right now they have no desire to place on those. They're focusing on the public right of way.
And if I may, this is Marlene with the City Attorney's Office. To clarify again, any utility pole in somebody's backyard would be located on private property. The utility pole is there subject to an easement that the utility has with the property owner. And so any addition to the pole would only be allowed if it were permissible under the terms of the easement that private property owner has with the utility. So there are certainly potential limits there.
Okay, so we are almost at 6:45. There's no more hands raised. If we have 1 minute for any more questions, if not, we will take a short break, and so we'll adjourn the study session.
I still have a question.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I was asking questions, and I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I understand. I don't think the real worry is power poles in backyards, but there are also power poles right on the street, and there are all kinds of poles going all over the place. And so I think that is probably the bigger concern. And so, I think if we play this right, our residents can get 5G service, we can get competition to the, the big incumbent providers that are wired, Comcast and AT&T. We can get better service at lower rates, and I think that is helpful to Cupertino. And so I just hope, right, as we navigate these waters and deal with residents that are concerned, that we're doing it on a cosmetic basis rather than trying to make any claims about RF. Frankly, right, those arguments will be moot if this comes to a lawsuit. And I think the other smart thing is we all want this, and we just have to understand that as we are looking for more bandwidth, that and we site these things closer to homes, and then what happens is the power levels go down so very substantially. And if we do this well, we can be at the cutting edge of 5G, and we can attract the investment from the carriers. If we do it wrong and we inhibit it and we make it challenging, I think we will defer the day where we get this service and the investment, but it'll come, and it probably won't come on our terms. So I hope that this is going to work out. I note Verizon's objection and hope that we're being prudent in collecting money and then really making sure that we don't take more than we can. I know that's the law, but I think Chad really has struck a good balance here. So I appreciate his work on this. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Leon.
Okay, so I have two questions, but I think we don't have time for answer. I'll take the answer offline. I'd like to understand more whether they can co-locate and whether when additional companies add to an existing pole, do they need to notify the residents? And then also, does the permit after it's approved expire if they don't? Right now, for example, they are getting 80 permits, but maybe they don't have a plan to even use them. So do they expire? Can we take it back if they don't use them, so that they don't use this as let's just get all the sites and for no reason? And then, because then this also has to do with how the companies really compete each other. They might, what if they got an approval for a site and then re-rent it to another or sublet it to another provider with a higher price, and then they are making profit on top of public property? How do we prevent that? So these are the questions that I hope to get answered later. But right now, since there is no time, I have some proposed changes to the current regulation. I'd like to see that we require 60 feet radius from any window. This is for aesthetic purposes. I don't think anyone wants to look out their window and see some equipment there. And this applies to ADUs. So any window in the city, that there should be certain feet away. So if they need to relocate the pole, since they have to reinstall anyway, find a location that's 60 feet away from any window, existing window. I hope that's in our regulation. And then I'd like to remove the existing distance limit for small cells near playground, schools, or parks. The reason is that when it's in front of someone's house, it's there 24/7, but no one is going to be, or in school it's different. Okay, for parks and playground, no one is going to be there 24/7. People will be there for a couple of hours a day and then leave. So I don't think it makes any sense to have any restriction on nearest playground or parks. Schools is different because children will be there for many hours a day. Then maybe then we will consider certain distance from the buildings of schools, not the playground or grass area of the schools. So can we clarify that? And also, I have proposed this to staff that I'd like to see a web form where people can submit their preference. For example, I'm actually a person who doesn't really care whether a small cell is closed or not, just like I'm not a person who cares about buying organic food or not. But some people cares about such things a lot. And some people, their body might be more sensitive to such things. So I think, but some people really welcome. Maybe some people would, I would be welcome. Welcome. I'd like Verizon in front of my house or backyard. Why don't we make this information available on a voluntary basis as a reference to all the providers? So any residents who really likes small cells and really desire stronger signals because they want wider bandwidth, they can submit their address in the form and say, I like cell from Verizon or some other. And then someone who really doesn't want it, they get to submit and say, I really don't want it. And then the providers can pick locations likely they are welcome to remove any resistance.
Okay,
So this is will be all
6:50.
voluntary. Okay.
It's now 6:50.
And then another thing I like to propose, this might be a little controversial, is for the least favorable category, the category 3. I know that other cities like Palo Alto, they require public notification before any submittal to the city. So I think we can require that only for category 3. That also serve as the discouragement. Avoid that because you'll need to notify the public before during your assessment. That's something to consider. So can I get, do I need consensus from each council? Are we going to vote? But this is
No,
not,
this
this
is
is a
just a
regulation.
study.
How does this work?
This is a study session. So if you wish to put those on the agenda.
No, the problem is this is not even going to be an ordinance. This is just a staff decision. It's all administrative. So can I get
I think you do
consensus that we really don't need distance away from playground and park?
So I concur. Let me leave it like that. I concur.
I think there needs to be a consensus position before we.
Yeah, we need to give direction today. We don't have time to schedule another because this is not going to be a council approved anything. All we have is staff direction, and then staff would act on it, and already it will be in the administrative regulation.
So Kirsten,
which
maybe
we don't approve.
Got two, so but maybe you need to do a poll vote.
Sure, I can do a roll call vote.
What are we voting on?
So let me.
The
So
change
I
that
propose first thing is no limit. That's not set limit to discourage small cells near playground or parks.
Oh, I would not support that. I was
But
against
I do
putting
want
cells.
to set a distance from any buildings where children will be in schools. But I don't think it will be should be more than residences because for residences the impact is greater. Otherwise, it's really not fair.
Can I make a?
Right now, we have 100 feet from schools and playground. I don't think that makes sense.
I'll tell you what doesn't make sense. If you wanna go to war and fight the carriers on all of this, put in 60 feet. You won't have any small cells in any neighborhood, right?
No, I want small cells in parks. People are there.
Yeah, I know, but with I guarantee you, most of our homes are not within 500 feet of a park. So you know the situation you're creating if you do this. The carriers are going to say we can't locate any poles within more than 60 feet from buildings, and it'll be non-operative. I mean that's going to restrict almost all the residential poles in the city.
Right. I would not favor
no,
the play.
60 feet is away from windows. So all they need is to move it a few feet. So it's away from any.
I also don't think it's feasible to administer something that has to look at every damn window. If you look at a building profile, our GIS system has that. And so I think what Chad has done is reasonable because he's looking at building envelope, which we do have in the GIS. I'm sure we don't have every window, and neither would we want to study this for every application we're going to get. We have 4,000 poles. How are you going to do that?
It's the applicant who has to study.
Oh, hold on. I think Darcy has something to say, please.
I mean, I haven't said anything on this item, so I would really appreciate, through the mayor to be heard. I think procedurally it's inappropriate for us to give direction at this point since this was noticed as a study session. since you do have a request from council in a second, I think it's probably appropriate to put it through our regular procedure of agendizing in the future.
Wait,
That's
we
what I
give
said at
directions
the
at study
beginning.
session all the time.
I'm not ready to make a vote on substantive recommendations at this study session. So I think it's much more appropriate to agendize what you're saying because it does have an impact upon our procedures. And I think notice to the public would be required as well.
Right.
So
I mean,
at
we have,
least I'd like one thing. Let's have a web form that people can submit their preferences.
I don't know how you get
I
people
already
within a
asked her. She
500-foot
said it's
radius to
okay.
agree on anything. I mean, what's that going to do?
So people can submit whether they prefer small cells or not. That can relieve us a lot of headaches from people who are really concerned about small cells. And most, I think 99% of people maybe are not. That's just help to make the process be more smooth. Heather already said this is permissible since it's voluntary for people to provide, and it's a data for the providers to consider. They don't have to, but it helps them if they consider.
So here's what we're going to do based upon Vice Mayor Paul's suggestion.
Can I just clarify one thing, though? It is noticed to have providing recommendations, but if the council wants to continue the study session to another time for that portion of the noticed agenda, it could do so.
That's what it sounds like to me.
From Public Works, it's Roger Lee, Director of Public Works. If there can be consensus on any of these items, so we don't have an additional agendized item, it would be appreciated. We just have so much work that's going on that and all the permits we have to process. This just takes a lot of staff time to be coming back.
So why can't we just decide on a direction? If you guys don't agree, then don't agree. I don't think.
okay.
So
I mean, I would definitely not favor I definitely not favor the change to playgrounds. I never wanted large cells in playgrounds either, but unfortunately we have them.
Large cell is different, right? We are talking about small cells that will be in front of anyone people.
So are we going for agreements on each one of these or not? Are we just further discussing? So we need to decide.
Right. Let's just go through each one and see if there's if we get 3 people for any of them. So there's the one regarding Leon, talk about the playground thing again.
Yeah, let's remove any limit on distance from playground or park.
Okay.
Just like in the Jellyman Park, it was right in front of someone's window and it was moved to the park.
Okay, so Kirsten, can you take a roll call on who would favor removing the distance limitation in playgrounds?
Councilmember Chow?
Yes.
Councilmember Sinks?
No.
Councilmember Willie?
Yes, for this guidance.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Paul?
No.
Mayor Sharp?
No.
Okay, so that's
Okay. Now let's move on to the one for the voluntary, where a resident can submit a web form to tell if they want a small cell in front of their house or not. I guess that's what was proposed.
Councilmember Chow?
Yes.
Councilmember Sinks?
No.
Councilmember Willie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Paul?
Yes, I'd be fine with that.
Mayor Sharp?
No.
Okay, so there's majority there with Sinks and Sharp voting no.
Okay, and then the third one was regarding
certain
60
radius
feet.
from the window. Maybe if not 60 feet, I don't know, 40 feet, but there has to be discouraged to put it in front of a window. Right now, the limit is like 25 feet from a housing envelope.
Yeah, right now, Right now it's 20 foot. Keep in mind that 40-foot radius from a streetlight pole to a structure would exclude 2/3 of all streetlight poles in the city.
Okay.
To a certain extent, staff is working to ensure we're not placing these facilities directly in line with people's windows. But I mean, people have windows on all sides of their houses. I just want to make you aware of that.
Okay, so Kirsten, go ahead with the 60, that they have to be 60 feet away from a window.
Councilmember Chow?
Okay, I might modify that. Okay. John, do you think 40 feet or I don't know how many feet is more reasonable? But since we're already considering it, so I'd like to say, put it something in the regulation. We would prefer it to be this many feet away.
It's only guidance. It's not a ordinance law, and so it's guidance. If it's not there, there's no reason for them to even think about it. So the guidance is good. So
they will. So Chad, is how many feet would be more reasonable if we have a guidance?
Yeah. So at this point in time, I've done a fair study with our GIS system. A 20-foot radius from structures excludes about 10% of the poles within the city. If you jump to a 25-foot radius, you're at 22%. You go to a 30-foot radius, you're at 41%. A 40-foot radius, 64%. 60-foot radius is 76% of the poles in the city. To a certain extent, I think expanding your radius beyond 20% starts to dilute the effectiveness of the three categories we've established. And we have our category 1, which is preferred, and we have a category 2, which is less preferred, and that's all residential neighborhoods. Now, if we establish this larger radius of 60 feet, we've basically excluded all residential neighborhoods. And so this category of tier 3, which is the least preferred, is moot because you've already established 1 and 2. Preferred and least preferred.
I'm talking about windows for aesthetic purposes.
Yeah, and to a certain extent with windows, that's going to be it's going to be something very similar, right? So yeah, people typically maybe have windows 3 feet off the corner of their house, so maybe you gain 3 feet. But you're still kind of in that general large radius area. Yeah, you know. That's
and we could be sued over this because this
it is
it's just least favorable position, right?
Yeah, but again,
okay, so pick a number and let's go because we also have
Leon, we're way behind schedule, so pick a number of feet and let's vote on it.
So discourage small cell within 40 feet radius of a window.
Okay, Kirsten.
Councilmember Chow?
Yeah,
Councilmember Sinks?
Absolutely not. And I will tell you, if you do this, you're going to put so many poles in category 3 that we're either going to prevent investment. Well, I get a chance to express myself on this. Or carriers are just going to do what they want to do. So no.
Is it discouraging?
Okay, can we just finish the vote, please? Kirsten, finish the vote.
Councilmember Willie?
It's guidance only.
Okay,
yes.
Is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Paul?
No.
Mayor Scharf?
No.
Okay, it's not a majority. Chow and Willie voting yes.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, we are 20 minutes over. So let's take a 5-minute break and start the regular council meeting at 7:10.
Thank you.